Hi guys, my name's Brett Manning. I'm trustee of the new Aussie Constitution Trust. The new Aussie Constitution is a proposed draft replacement for the Australian Constitution. If you want to find out more about that, have a look at the first video in this series. Today, specifically going to talk about the Senate. Now, with the new Aussie Constitution, we've tried to continue to use what works well for us in Australia, and one of those things is the two houses of Parliament. So we have a House of Representatives and we have a Senate. Today I want to talk about the Senate because it's one of the areas where the new Aussie Constitution varies from the current Australian Constitution. So I think there's a couple of issues with the current Senate, the way it operates. And certainly since Federation, successive Australian governments have tried to make changes to the way the Australian Senate operates to try and deal with some problems that exist. Now, the Senate was originally set up as a House of Review, much like the House of Lords in the United Kingdom Parliament. So a second set of eyes run over legislation and suggest improvements. But the other role that the Australian Senate played was supposedly to represent the states. So the senators would be elected for each of the states, and they would be able to protect the states' interests, particularly the smaller states against the larger states, because each of the states had the same number of senators. The problem is that this all sounded good in theory, but no sooner had the new constitution started to operate than it became clear that we would very much operate under a political party system. And what occurred was that members, including senators, would vote in line with what their party wanted, not what their state wanted. And so this function of protecting the states really has never operated since the Australian Constitution has been operating for 120 years. There are only about 2 or 3 occasions where senators from a particular state have voted as a bloc. The rest of the time they vote down party lines. Now, this has the effect that if the government has a majority in the Senate, then the Senate largely becomes a rubber stamp for the operations of the government. If, as has happened quite often in recent years, the government doesn't have a majority in the Senate, then the Senate can obstruct the legislation of the government going through Parliament and block it. And in circumstances where there may be a few independents with the balance of power, then they can control whether legislation passes through the Senate. The government, to get its legislation passed, has to negotiate with a senator effectively looking to pork barrel their position in their own interests. So it's not a very good arrangement, and we've had several instances in recent years where a freshly elected government with a mandate to do certain things that they took to the electorate, and they were voted into power only to have that legislation blocked immediately after the election by a hostile Senate. So it doesn't work in that regard. And because the voting is generally down party lines, it also doesn't work as well as a House of Review as it should. So with the new Aussie Constitution drafting, we've made a few changes. The first of those is that we don't allow the Senate to finally block legislation of the government. So the Senate can reject legislation from the House of Representatives on 2 occasions and suggest amendments and send it back to the House of Representatives. But if the lower house approves it on 3rd occasion, then it passes to the Governor-General for assent. Now, the reasoning for this is that if the country has elected a particular government to govern, then they should have a mandate to govern, and they should have the right to govern and make the decisions that the electorate requires. And it's not appropriate for the senators of an opposing party to block that legislation from ultimately going through. So the new Aussie Constitution puts more emphasis on the Senate being used as a house of review. So for instance, the Senate can send legislation that's come from the House of Representatives, it can send it to the Senate committees for review, and they can report back to the Senate. The Senate can propose amendments on 2 occasions, but ultimately, if the lower house pushes through the legislation with or without amendments, then it will go into legislation and become law. But in order to strengthen that House of Review responsibility for the Senate, the new Aussie Constitution also changes the way that senators are elected. Effectively, each state has 12 senators, and each of the territories, the Australian Capital Territory and the Northern Territory, have 2 senators, and that gives us a total of 76 senators. Of the 12 for each state, the new Aussie Constitution reserves 9 of those seats for political parties, and it reserves 3 of the seats for independents. The way this works is at an election, there'll be 2 parts to a Senate ballot paper. One will list the political parties, and under each political party will be 6 candidates in the order that the party would elect them if they won seats. And the voter simply selects 1, 2 and 3 for their first 3 preferences against the parties, not against the individuals. Then the votes are counted for the first, second and third preferences, and the party with the highest vote count wins 5 seats, so it'll select the first 5 people in their list. The party with the second highest count will win 3 seats, and the party with the third highest count wins 1 seat. So that gives us 9 of the 12 in a particular state. Then the other 3, in the other part of the ballot paper, will be the independents running. And again, the voter just picks 1, 2, 3. There are 3 preferences for independent candidates. Out of the candidates that get at least 9% of the primary vote, the 3 preference votes for each candidate are then tallied, and the highest 3 win the 3 seats that are available for that state. Same sort of process applies for the territories, except that 1 seat's for political parties, 1 seat's for independents. And the new Aussie Constitution also explains what happens in the event that there are not enough eligible independents or not enough votes received by political parties, and the seats are adjusted accordingly. The effect of this system is that the government will probably never have a majority in the Senate, but the Senate will also have a lot more independents. From the voter's point of view, will make voting easier, because you're picking literally 1, 2, 3 for the political parties, 1, 2, 3 for the independents. The new Aussie Constitution also builds in a state veto. So this is a final catch-all for the protection of states' rights. And under certain circumstances, if the legislation has been passed by the lower house for the third time and is going to be sent to the Governor-General for assent, it's possible at that point for a state veto to be passed. For a state veto to pass, a majority of 9 out of 12 senators from a majority of the states have to pass the veto. And in that circumstance, the legislation is rejected. There is a circuit breaker on legislation that goes to the Governor-General for assent, which has been rejected twice by the Senate and passed 3 times by the lower house. And that is that the Governor-General has the ability to block the legislation on the basis of a series of questions that are determined to make sure that the legislation is not completely inconsistent with the mandate upon which the government was elected. So at the end of the day, there weren't any simple solutions for how to structure the Senate and still make sure that the government operates efficiently and that we get the protections and the checks on the legislation before it passes through that the Senate should be able to provide. We believe these changes are necessary for the Senate to increase its independence, to increase the power of the Senate to act as a house of review, but also to remove the ability of the Senate to reject the mandate which has been granted by the people when they elected the government. If you want to look over these clauses of the Senate in the new Aussie Constitution, please visit the website www.newaussieconstitution.com.au, and there you can download a full copy of the proposed new Aussie Constitution. Thanks for your time.